We're going to talk about the BBC. This Labour government is constantly trying to come out with plans to bail it out. More and more people, quite understandably in my view, are not paying the TV licence. There are many reasons you can get away with that while still watching telly. If you don't watch the BBC, if you don't watch live events, you can watch Netflix, you can watch Disney, all of those streaming channels. Doesn't cost you anything. You don't need a TV licence. Well, to plug that gap, if you like, the latest proposal from a government who really want to help the BBC, they love the BBC, is to sort of incorporate streaming services into the licence fee. So you pay £174, it's £174.50 as of April. Now, the proposal is, unless you pay that, you won't be able to watch Netflix or Disney or Paramount or any of those other streaming services. Now, I don't know what you think about that, but I think a lot of people might be quite annoyed by that. Let's talk to, it's good to have her back on the show, it's been a while, to former Cabinet Minister, former Tory Cabinet Minister. She switched to Reform, but it's good to have her on the show. Ann Widdecombe, welcome, Ann.
Hello, glad to be back.
Thank you. Now, your thoughts on this. Only recently, the Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, in another proposal, which is to bail out the BBC. Labour love the BBC, of course, public service broadcasting and all that, as opposed to entertaining broadcasting. Her proposal was that we all have to pay for the BBC in our taxes, in our income tax. Even the BBC don't like that because that compromises their independence. The new proposal is that unless you pay your BBC TV licence fee, you won't be able to watch Netflix, you won't be able to watch Paramount and all the other streaming services. I don't know about you, Anne, but I find that rather authoritarian and unsatisfactory.
Well, it's certainly inequitable. I mean, I should say right away, I don't have any streaming services, so I've no personal interest in this. But I nevertheless feel that it's quite wrong. First of all, it's wrong continually to bail out the BBC. The BBC, if it is making the right sort of programmes and people are enjoying it, the BBC would be successful in its own right. Now, there are bits of it that, I think we should support. The World Service, for example, Radio 3. But in general, the main television services that the BBC produces is not something that justifies a tax, which is what this is. Well, now the proposal is that you pay that tax even if you don't watch it, which to my mind is insane.
Yeah, and deeply unfair. In terms of the BBC generally, Anne, how have you viewed the direction of travel, particularly in their journalism? I think it's a very strange spectacle to see this organisation which stares us in the face and says, we are studiously balanced, we are studiously unbiased, when we know the opposite is true. It's one of the least balanced journalistic outfits I've ever seen. And I think that the people who are drifting away from paying the TV licence fee, a lot of them are fed up with the BBC's left-wing, often very anti-Israel journalism. What do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, I think that's a very fair assessment. It is not as impartial as it should be. The reporting throughout the COVID crisis was hysterical. It was inflated. They kept telling us that people were dying of COVID who weren't dying of COVID at all. And it was, I think, pretty indicative of its preference for sensation over understanding. It is not impartial in its analysis, and if something is dull and boring, it won't say it. It always wants to go for the drama. And that is not the BBC that I grew up with, which was extremely sensible. Interviewing was extremely fair. The idea wasn't that you've got a gotcha moment. The idea was that you got to the bottom of whatever it was that the politician of the day was proposing. And I believe that the BBC has declined phenomenally. And of course, climate change is a very good one. Everything, the BBC, according to the BBC, is due to climate change. The fact that there might be some other explanation, or we've had these phenomena throughout history, never mentioned.
No, exactly. Why is it? Why have the powers that be at the BBC allowed it to drift in this direction? I totally agree with you, and you know, I grew up. In the glory days of Auntie Beeb. The BBC understood this country. It understood the audience. It served children brilliantly. It served young people brilliantly. It served older people brilliantly. It entertained the nation. It informed the nation in a fair and balanced way. And that's what the state broadcasters should be all about if we must pay for it. It's assumption, it's entitled view that we must carry on paying for it when it's lost all of those facets I just listed is extraordinary to me. I mean, why can't Tim Davie, the current Director General, and his acolytes see that they've dropped the golden goose here? They've stopped doing what they're there for.
Well, when Tim Davie came in, he made a very, very big issue of impartiality. But I don't think that the words have been matched by action. And yes, there are very good programmes on the BBC that cost a lot to make them. They wouldn't be able to make if it was purely commercial, but not many. Not many now. And I think that they have lost sight of that, as you rightly say. You asked me why. I just think a very steadily growing left-wing influence, not only in political terms, but in terms of the sort of entertainment that is put on. You know, all the comics are left-wing, for example.
Exactly, yeah, and the dramas are all about the horrors of Thatcher, the horrors of Toryism, etc.
And if anybody made a drama praising Thatcher, they wouldn't show it.
Yeah, no, they wouldn't. They definitely wouldn't. What do you think about? I mean, what we're talking about, generally speaking, here is value for money in terms of what the licence fee soon will be, which is £174.50 a year. Quite a lot, by the way. It's much cheaper to get Netflix. But in terms of value for money, are they delivering? I don't think they are they?
I don't believe they are. As I say, there are bits of the BBC, like the World Service, there are bits of the BBC which are worth supporting and which probably couldn't survive if they had to rely purely on advertising and commercial practices. So from that point of view, there are bits of it that are worth supporting. But if you're asking me, are they worth £174 a year? I must say I do wonder every year when I renew my licence why I'm doing it. And yet I seem to. And I think a lot of people now are questioning that, and they're saying, hang on, why are we doing this? Perhaps we don't need to be doing it. And the streamers have provided some sort of alternative. Yeah. So the idea now is to take away the alternative.
And I do believe that in this day and age, I mean, the BBC is clinging on to the licence fee for dear life. And sadly, Labour governments will always support them in that, because Labour governments have this kind of idea about public service broadcasting. And of course, they see their kindred spirits in the BBC, left-wing government, left-wing broadcaster. But I do think we need a discussion, I don't know if you agree, about what I now see as the anachronism of the TV licence. It's locked in the past. And as you alluded to earlier, Anne, why can't the BBC just be like other broadcasters, to live on its products? If they were delivered entertaining television, you could say, if you want to pay for this service, you can. If you don't like Netflix, if you don't want to, you don't have to. But forcing us to pay this licence fee by law, I mean, that's got to end, hasn't it?
Well, of course, if you're forced to pay any fee by law, you might as well call it a tax and have done with it. And that is effectively what is happening. We're being taxed in order to pay for the BBC. And yes, I mean, I think it's time for a root and branch review. I'm not going to go rushing in and say, kill off the licence fee tomorrow and do something else in its place. But I am going to say it's high time to ask if we should be doing that.
Yeah, I think we need a serious debate. Do you mind if I slightly move on, while I've got you, for your esteemed view on this government right now? What did you think today about Rachel Reeves's announcement for growth? I think it's extraordinary. We've got this government that keeps going growth, 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 growth. We are all about growth. Well, you just came up with this budget last October, a £43 billion tax grab, the biggest in history, a grotesque attack on the private sector. You killed off growth in October. Who do you think you're kidding?
Well, Reeves calls herself an economist, but she must have been missing on the very first lesson in economy that was ever delivered, because everybody knows if you put up costs for employers, one, they have to reduce the numbers they employ, or they have to pass on those costs to customers who then reduce the amount they buy. And that is not a recipe for growth. That is a recipe for the exact opposite. And that, of course, is what is happening now. I think very slowly they're waking up to the fact that that's what they did. But didn't they stop to think in the first place, haven't they got anybody there who actually understands these things? We've got a government in which the Prime Minister doesn't understand politics and the Chancellor of the Exchequer doesn't understand money.
It's not a brilliant situation, is it? I mean, this government, they're socialists. I mean, they're fairly extreme left-wing socialists, if you ask me. And they labour under the delusion, in my view, that creativity, productivity, the prosperity of the nation comes from the public sector. Nothing could be further from the truth. Entrepreneurialism, creativity is in the private sector. And what are this lot doing to the private sector, our usually brilliant private sector? They are taxing it to the hilt, taking all their profits and giving it to the public sector. And that is a recipe for economic disaster, is it not?
Yes, and they're not even giving it to the public sector in terms of increasing services. They're giving it to public sector unions in terms of increasing pay, which is something entirely different. And the public sector, of course, doesn't make money. It's the private sector which makes money, and it's the making of the money which then funds all these other services. And they don't appear to understand that either. They are very, very left-wing. I mean, the first thing they did when they came in was to, at the expense of the old folks, I might point out, was to give huge pay rises to public sector unions and to some other unions. So they're not at all in tune with the way an economy works.
Absolutely. A last question to you, if I can. Again, going off piste. A poll out today which reveals that the majority of people in Britain would favour a return of the death penalty. Interestingly, the biggest majority was among younger people, millennials. Where do you stand on the death penalty, Anne?
I have always believed that there's a moral argument for having the death penalty, because in the 5 years following its abolition in 1965, for the next 5 years, we continued to collect statistics based on the division between capital murder, that's murder that would have attracted the death penalty, and murder that wouldn't have attracted the death penalty. And the capital murder rate went up, because in Hansard went up 130%. And there was also a big concomitant rise in the instance of firearms being taken on robberies. Now, that, to my mind, is absolute proof that it's a deterrent. I'm not interested in it as a retribution, but I am interested, is it a deterrent? Would it save innocent lives? The answer is yes.
Thank you for an unequivocal answer. I tend to agree with you. Ann Widdecombe, excellent to have you back on the show again. Good to talk. Thank you very much for your time. That is the redoubtable Miss Widdecombe, former Tory Cabinet Minister, long-serving member of the political elite, and also she switched sides not so long ago to the Reform UK party, so good to have her back on the show.